Have you ever wondered how does a user application talks to server application and how do modern mobile and web applications work so seamlessly? Let's get answers to these questions. Welcome back to my YouTube channel API Test Hub. Today, we are diving into one of the most essential concepts in modern web development, that is REST APIs. From social media apps to e commerce websites, REST APIs power seamless communication between clients and servers. In this video, we will break down what REST APIs are, how they work, principles of REST APIs, and why they are so popular. Whether you are a beginner or looking to sharpen your knowledge, this video has got you covered. Let's get started. So, before understanding REST APIs, let's learn what is an API. So, an API is like a messenger that takes your request and brings back the response. It allows application to interact without knowing the internal workings of each other. From weather apps to payment gateways, APIs are the backbone of modern connectivity. So let's understand the concept of API with an example of Google Maps. Think about using Google Maps to find a coffee shop nearby. So, what happens there? You open a Google map and type coffee shop near me. So, what happens internally? Google Maps sends that request to an API that gathers location data and information about nearby coffee shops. That it sends to the server where all the information about the coffee shops is stored. So the API collects this information from the server and sends it back to the Google Maps, and you see a list of coffee shops on your screen, complete with addresses, ratings, and photos. So here you are acting as a user and making a request, and Google Maps is an interface. API is a messenger which gets your request and gives you the response, and server is the place where information is stored. So just like you don't have to visit to every coffee shop to see which ones are nearby. Google Maps doesn't do the same. It doesn't hold any information itself. The API does the work. It search and brings back the results. So this was all about the APIs. Now comes the next question. What is a REST API? So what is a REST? So REST is stands for Representational State Transfer. So it is basically an architectural style that defines how APIs should communicate. So it is an architecture that imposes conditions on how an API should work. In simpler terms, it's a set of rules that developers follow to create an API that can be easily understood and used by other systems. So let's understand it in a graphical presentation. So what happens in a REST API? REST API works by allowing a client like a web browser or mobile application to communicate with the server using HTTP methods and a URL and gives back the JSON response. So don't get confused with these big terms like HTTP methods, URLs, and JSON. We will cover all of these in more details in upcoming videos as well. So don't get confused with it. So just understand the concept that what is a REST API? It is a kind of architectural style which developers follow to construct an API. So it it has different methods and protocols to follow. A client sends the request in the form of a HTTP method and a URL to the server and gets back the response in the form of JSON. So let's understand this REST API with more examples and in more detail. So let's understand it with example of social media feed. Imagine you are scrolling through Instagram or Facebook feed, and what happens there? Each time you swipe down, your app is making a GET request to the servers and fetching the latest posts and updates and giving back to your feed. In this example, the client is your mobile app and the server is Instagram's backend system storing all the posts. Communication between these is happening through an API. So API is the medium which is connecting both the client and the server here. So now let's go and look upon another examples so that you can understand the basic full flow how these REST APIs work. So let's understand with another example. So here is an example of a weather, like when you see when you search about the weather of a current location, how this thing happens here. So here what happens is when you open a weather app in your mobile, so what happens that weather app sends a request to its API. So this is a weather API. So this API creates a request and sends it to the server. So this request consists of this full thing. So what is this? So here you can see a method. So this is a method which it sends to the server. So this is called a method. So we will cover about this in detail in upcoming videos, but as of now just understand how this REST API works. So API sends the request in this format. So this method can be anything. So here we are fetching the details, we are getting the details. So that is it's a get method, and it has a URI which consists of a protocol which is HTTPS, which is a secured protocol, and a domain where the data is stored, and this is the endpoint. This is called the endpoint, which defines what information you need. So this is this is the request which server receives. It understands the request, whether it's a get method or what kind of endpoint it has to go to, and it understands it and gets the data according to the request and gives back the response in a JSON format. So we will cover these in more detail. What is the JSON format? What are these? How we define the key and values in the JSON. So as of now, just understand what kind of response we get from the server in terms of REST APIs. It's getting a response in the form of JSON and giving back to the API. And what API does is API parses that response and gives back to the application, and it shows it like this. So it's giving back the JSON format which has a particular information about city, temperature, and condition, and it's giving back in the form of UI presentation. So basically, in REST APIs, this whole thing is happening with particular anode things which are internally being used. So this is all about how REST APIs are working internally. So we will cover more how these GET requests are made, how we can test these requests, how we can build these requests. But as of now, just understand the concept of REST APIs. So hopefully this has cleared the concept of REST APIs. Now let's understand few of the principles of REST APIs. So first principle is client server architecture. As we have studied a lot throughout the video, what is a client, what is the server. So there is one client which acts as an interface like your mobile app or your browser, and there is one server which stores the information. So in here you will see, you can get an example of a Netflix example. So the app you use to watch movies is separate from the server which stores those movies. So it has a different client and a server architecture. So this is one of the principles of REST APIs. The next one is the statelessness. So, what is statelessness? So, each request is independent in REST APIs. So, for example, think of it like ordering a pizza. So, every time you call, you need to give your address, even if you ordered yesterday. So, server doesn't remember you. So, basically, in REST APIs, each request has its own information. So no session data is stored on the server for request. So it doesn't have any states. Next comes the other API principles is the uniform is a cacheable, sorry. So what is cacheable? Responses are not cached in REST APIs. So sorry, they can be cached to improve the speed. So what is caching? Caching is storing the data on a cacheable servers. So we will understand this concept more in detail, but caching is storing the data for some time, especially for the responses which are not being changed frequently. So REST APIs uses this concept of caching, which makes them more faster as compared to other kinds of like SOAP and other APIs. So it has a cacheable concept. It caches the data. Next principle is the uniform interface, which means they have a consistent way of accessing resources. So by consistent way of accessing resources, I mean is they doesn't change frequently. So for example, get an example of McDonald's. So when you go there, it has a uniform menu and every time you can order the same menu. So it doesn't frequently change. So that is a uniform interface. The interface the REST APIs are using is kind of uniformed. Next principle is the layered system. So basically, it has different layers. So you don't have to. So REST APIs are like a supply chain, you can say. So you don't need to know the complexities of each layer, the chain. So all you need to know is about the data. So the required data should be there, but you are not concerned about the layers which are involved in this whole process. So basically, the REST APIs uses a layered systems. So next is code on demand. So what is code on demand? So what happens here is server can send executable code to the clients. So taking an example of new features, for example, any new features which you are getting on your mobile applications, this happens because of this principle only, that servers can provide the executable code to the clients. So they are sending some executable codes and clients can execute them, and for example this updates, they can automatically do the feature updates on your mobile application. So this is a kind of optional principle which is rarely used. So it is one of the principles of REST APIs. So this was all about the principles, different principles, and we will cover all these principles in the logical ways, how they are implemented, the practical ways, how they are used in upcoming videos, and how these principles are really important for making these REST APIs very popular. So, last but not the least, why these APIs are very popular among everywhere, right? So, why REST? So, as I told earlier that REST APIs have various principles which are the main features making them more popular. The very first one is the simplicity and flexibility. So as we know that already started that the REST APIs uses HTTP methods. So these HTTP methods are very easy and they are easy to implement and to learn. That is why it makes the complexity of the service very simple. So it reduces the complexities. So it's easy to learn and implement. It doesn't require complex configuration for developers. This means less time spent setting up and more time building great features. Next come the scalability. Because of its client server architecture, your application and the server can grow independently. So if your app needs more feature or traffic, the backend can be updated without affecting the user interface. Next come the performance. So as I told earlier that REST supports caching and statelessness, which means it has faster response time, especially for data and that doesn't change often. It reduces server loads because clients can store copies of data and use it again without needing to request it every time. Next come the wide adoption. So REST is everywhere. So it's used by major platforms like Twitter, Facebook, Google, and Amazon, which means that developers already know how to use it, and these are tons of tools and resources to make development even easier. So, in short, REST makes building and interacting with APIs fast, efficient, and scalable. It's simple enough for small projects but powerful enough to handle complex applications, making it the perfect choice for developers around the world. So that was all about the REST APIs. We will cover about REST APIs more about its HTTP methods, about the errors we encounter in the upcoming videos. So stay tuned and don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. Thank you everyone.